GoPro is going. GoPro is active. Yeah, I'm gonna get the Google Meet up and running now. Hello. Yep. Let's see.
I'm gonna take it outside today just so I can pretend I'm on it with you. And you'll tell me when you're ready for recording. You're gonna want everybody to.
You could probably start recording now.
All right, you're on. I've accepted it, and it's a going.
Cool.
Alright, I'm trying to remember how to reverse the screen here.
I got my sound off. I can hear it over there.
Is that me now?
I don't see you, but I see the, what do you call it, Marsh, or the
You're
small
just an
guy.
avatar for me. I think you gotta turn your camera on.
Let's see.
There you go, now I see your face.
Now I'll reverse it.
Oh, there we go.
Alright, is it up and running now?
Oh, there we go. I've got two cameras. That looks good. Nicole, can you see that thing?
Alright, I'm gonna try to share my screen.
Hey, Nicole, you think it's windy?
You shouldn't have to share your screen.
Yeah, but then isn't everybody gonna end up like chiming in?
No, you're just seeing, like right now I see your avatar. Go back to your camera and just go with that. You're sharing an iPhone, you just see the actual screen. You're good.
That's me?
That's you.
Okay. Alright.
You got a little.
I'm gonna jump off the boat and we'll get rid of that echo. Whoa.
Oh, everybody's starting to come on now, Nicole.
Let's see. So, are we still seeing the boat with Mr. Menta?
Yeah, we're filming
I
each
am
other.
the one with Mr.
Okay.
Menta, and I think that's Mr. Docker on my. I have two screens. You've got two cameras going.
You should we have your camera up and running too?
It is. I got you broadcasting.
Okay. So I got the camera on my head, and should I just turn my camera off and you just go?
No, because you're going to want to zoom in on stuff.
Okay. All right. So I guess everybody that's coming in, just type here so that way we can see who's here eventually. Is it that time yet?
12:57. We got.
All right. Well, I think 12:57 is the official start, so I'll get going.
Yeah. We only got about half the kids right now. They're showing up as you go, though.
All right, I'll give them another minute while I walk around and just give a little lay of the land here. So I'm out with the Monongahela River. You can see the river up in the background. Mr. Menta's on today's school bus, and the river kind of runs down and out. There's a train bridge, and then we've got the train tracks are right over in here, running kind of along the whole edge. And what I'm walking on right now is an area of the higher type of marsh that I was talking about in class. And you can see this big grassland that's out in front of me, and then all the trees in the background, where the elevation of the land picks up to the point where there's not any salt water going to be back there ever, where you see the trees. Off in the distance there's a bunch of white egrets for some animal life, and I'm going to dig in here and get into some of the plant life in just a moment. Kind of walking around in a really neat area of the salt marsh that has a lot of glasswort. Can you still see me?
I can, yeah.
Okay. And the glasswort is turning colors this time of year. Pick up one little piece of the glasswort and show it to the Google camera and then the GoPro camera. And what I'm trying to show here is a succulent plant, and the succulent plant itself, let me tear off a little piece. All right, it's basically a little tiny cucumber looking thing, and it is edible. If I turn the camera on myself, I'll go ahead and eat one. And you know, it's actually not as bitter as I thought it was going to be. You can see some that have not turned colors yet. So this is the glasswort that you would normally see in the summertime. And this is the pretty colors that it's turning for its fall look all around me out here on the marsh. So the salt marsh itself, I was saying that it's basically layers and layers and layers of dead grass. So right here where I'm standing, here's an area of dead grass that is laying down, and if I clear it off a little, you can see the mud. Okay, and looks like there might be some snails and stuff down in here that we'll get into in a little bit. But what happens is that the grass is gonna die over the course of the winter. It's all gonna lay down, and then in the snow melt with the spring floods, it's gonna get covered with fine dirt. And this grass is just never ever gonna get a chance to rot completely. So if I dig in a little bit here and actually pull some of the stuff out, you can see that the peat itself is made up of the roots of the grass, but also it's going to be made up of the grass itself that never had a chance to rot because it got covered with this fine silty mud that you can see on my fingers. Okay, this fine silty mud is only here because there is no huge waves smashing this area. It's protected by the actual train tracks now from any storms from ever really coming up in here and hitting. And the mud's just going to pile up, and the grass is going to grow on the mud every single year. So the type of grass that's laying down in front of me is the salt marsh hay. And here's some of the salt marsh hay that hasn't died yet. You can see it's kind of like a shorter type of grass. And this is the type of plants, the glasswort and the salt marsh hay are the types of grasses that like to live up in the higher part of the marsh that aren't always flooded every time the tide comes in. This will only get flooded like this past weekend. I don't know if you can hear the train behind me. There goes the train. This past weekend we had new moon tides, and the water really came up here and inundated the area. The tide is coming in right now, and I'm walking up to the edge of one of the tidal areas here, and this is one of those mosquito ditches that I talked to you about. You can see how it's kind of in a nice straight line that was dug by people back in the 1930s and 40s to drain the salt marshes to get rid of those mosquitoes. And you can see that the marshes still have yet to repair themselves from what we dug out, what people dug out 75 or more years ago. Okay, living along the edge of it is the other type of grass that likes the salt marsh, and this is the cord grass. So it's not the salt marsh hay, it's the taller cord grass, and this type of grass can actually live underwater for most of the day. Both types of grasses can grow with their roots in salt water, and they have a very special way to get rid of the salt that their roots are pulling in, because all the plant wants is the fresh water. And I don't know if you can see this or not, but the actual stems of the plant are crusted with salt, and the plants have the ability to excrete the salt out of their cells, so that way they can never that way they can keep doing the osmosis and get the nutrients pumping through the plant tissues. If there's too much salt, the salt can actually stop the osmosis from happening, and prevent the plant from getting the nutrients around, and that's why most plants die when they go in the salt water. Okay, so we've got the salt marsh hay, we've got the glasswort, we've got the cord grass. Those are all good examples of producers to add into your salt marsh food webs or chains. Now, there's a lot of grass out here in the salt marsh. The grass is all food. The glasswort, it's all food because they're plants. So there is an herbivore out here that likes to eat the grass, but it actually waits for the grass to die, and it's called the coffee bean snail. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to find some of these coffee bean snails for you. I just saw a spider go running by, but if you take the grass and move the grass apart, okay, underneath the grass you get down to the mud, you can actually find other types of organisms living down here. There's a good example of an organism that's living in the salt marsh, and it's the rib mussel. All right, this one happens to have been stepped on probably by me or somebody else, but the rib mussel is a type of bivalve. It's a mollusk, and it really likes to live right up here underneath the grass. And when the tide comes in, it filter feeds the water and gets all the plankton out of the water. Here's one that's alive. I don't know if you can see it or not, but they just kind of grow sticking right out of the mud. And if I keep digging down in here, I'm hoping to find some of those little snails, but I'm having a hard time because the tides were so high. I might actually have to look at some of the taller grasses in order to be able to find them. But it's a little snail. It's a snail that actually has lungs, so it can't live when the tide gets too high. So let me just keep kind of feeling around here for those coffee bean snails. And not really seeing too many at the moment. But if you're a coffee drinker, they literally get their namesake from that they look almost exactly like a coffee bean itself. Oh, here's a fiddler crab. So living right underneath this grass, it acts as a camouflage and it shields them from their predators. But here is a female fiddler crab, and she's just kind of crawling along. And fiddler crabs also like to eat the dead grass particles. They take their little claws and shovel the mud into their mouth, and they're gonna eat and digest all the little ground up plant parts and little worms and other types of animals that might be living in there. So they're a good example of an omnivore, these fiddler crabs. And you can see probably the hole that she lives in right next to this rib mussel right here. But pulling the grass apart, you can see another hole, somebody's home, a couple more rib mussels in here. Oh, there's a little isopod jumping around. Just trying to pull away some more of the, I don't know if you can see these little tiny crabs crawling around here. At that stage, I don't know if they would be baby fiddler crabs or something else. Let me check over here, see what's crawling around. Oh, another fiddler crab right here. I don't know if you can see it. I think it might be a little boy. Yeah, it's a little boy fiddler crab because he has the big huge claw. Only the boy fiddler crabs have those claws, the really big one. There's another one. There's a lot of fiddler crabs in here. Maybe that's why there's no coffee bean snails. There is one of those isopods. See if I can get it to come up. But I mean, as you can tell, this is a wet, muddy environment, even when the tide's not full high. That's why you don't want to wear your best shoes if you ever come out into the salt marsh. I'm gonna just change location really quick and maybe get up into a little higher part of the marsh. The coffee bean snails have probably all floated out of here because of the new moon tides that were coming through. So let me see what I can find out here. Well, shoot, I'm not finding the coffee bean snails. M&S, it's absolutely loaded with them. So it's interesting how salt marsh, even though it's all the same plants and animals technically, how it can be different at the same time. So a lot of fiddler crabs and rib mussels here, but not a lot of what I was expecting to find, which would be those little snails. So I'm not able to find the snails itself, so we'll look for one more second here. See if I can grab one. But that's that. Nope. All right, well, I'm gonna give up on finding those. We will come to the salt marsh if given the opportunity by our new superintendent when he does take up the position, and we're going to do a coffee bean snail population study. So the salt marsh, if you think about ecosystems, the salt marsh is really its own ecosystem. It's got its own food web, its own food chains that go in that food web, and there's unique plants that live here and nowhere else with the salt marsh, and the animals come in to eat those and other animals come in to eat those. So the coffee bean snails and the fiddler crabs, they're in here, they're eating the grasses, and then you end up with a lot of birds that actually come in to eat the snails and the crabs. And way off in the distance over there, I don't know if you can see those white objects, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 snowy egrets. They could be white egrets. The only way I can tell is looking at their feet. One's got yellow feet, one's got black feet, but I can't tell from here. But they're definitely a white egret of some type. And what they're doing is they're just walking around the grass and they're just picking off as many of those crabs and as many snails and mussels as they can eat. And they're just literally grazing on the buffet of crabs and snails in here, eating all the grass. So there is so much grass here in the salt marsh that the salt marsh is actually ranked number 2 in productivity, only behind the rainforest. All right, so the rainforests down in the tropics are the only place on earth where you're going to find more primary production or photosynthetic organisms. And that's how much grass is actually living out here. It actually can compete with the tropical rainforest in terms of how much food it can produce for animals. It's a pretty amazing place right here in our own town and here in Connecticut, to have all these salt marshes. It's actually quite a beautiful spot. What I think I'd like to do next is maybe go back on the school bus and just take a little quick trip up and maybe get some pictures and have you see some of the birds. All the trees that you're seeing in the background over on this side, those trees are part of the Stuart B. McKinney National Wildlife Refuge, and this is a bird migration corridor that is set up, and I think there's plots of land that are set aside for birds as a bird sanctuary to help them to migrate, and these spots are going to never be built on, so that way the birds will always have a place for refuge and to find food other than somebody's backyard with cats and dogs and people trying to shoot them. So that is a good thing, and I think Stuart B. McKinney is linked up with other sites in Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and maybe even further north, so that way the birds can have spots to stop and take a rest and get their energy back on their way south and on the way back north.
Before we start the motor, you want to talk about the storm surge and
yeah,
sponginess?
Yep. So looking over the edge, you can see that it drops off pretty good, and you can see the edge of the actual salt marsh has all these holes in it, and there's not a lot of grass growing right along the edge. And what this is, every year the edges of the salt marsh freeze over, and this is what you would call ice damage to the salt marsh. So the ice freezes and it grabs a hold of all the plants that it freezes, and then a big storm will come through, and the block of ice with the plants frozen in it will literally float up, and it tears the plants out by the roots. And then you can see all the different holes here are basically where the root balls of the plants used to be, which is kind of interesting. You've ever wondered why the edges of the marsh look like that? And then fiddler crabs and things will move into those little grooves and then dig them out even more to form burrows to hide from their predators in. So whenever you see these areas of holy mud, if you will, along the edge of the river, that's from the ice damage. So a huge chunk of ice formed right here and literally ripped all the plants out by the roots from a big storm that came through. I'm sinking in a little bit. So this is an area of mostly cordgrass that I'm kind of walking through. So it's going to be a spot that's flooded quite a bit by the tides, and you can see there's a rack line that actually formed. I'm going to grab a bunch of it right now, and you can see that rack line blowing in the wind here is made up of leaves from trees and grass for the most part. All right, all this material is going to eventually work its way down onto the mud and get trapped in the mud and become a part of the peat layer that's underneath where I'm standing. So this marsh has probably been, the grass has been growing here since the last ice age, and it's been laying over and getting covered with mud and growing and laying over, getting covered with mud and so on for probably 10 or 15,000 years. And what that's done is it's made a layer of peat that could be as much as 8 feet thick below my feet, and that's where the sponginess of the salt marsh comes from. I don't know if you can see my foot, but when I push down, you can see the water kind of coming up around my foot, and the sponginess of the salt marsh, even though this area hasn't had water on it for a day or so, it still is showing the water that it absorbed when the water was here, and it's because of all the peat that's underneath it. I don't know if you can see Mr. Amenta's camera or not, but when you're out on the salt marsh, it's kind of a wobbly situation because you're literally standing on top of a Jenga pile of dead plants. So the ground moves when you're out here, and if you like jump up and down a couple of times, you can see the actual ground has shock waves in it, and you can simulate a little mini earthquake. And when we get to come out here, we'll do this as a group, and you'll actually feel the ground shake when people jump, and it's because of the Jenga pile of dead plants under my feet that act like the sponge, and that sponge cleans the water. So the water is slowly trickling through all these layers of peat, and in these layers of peat you've got bacteria, and the bacteria actually, and different types of algae that like to remove phosphate and nitrogen from the water. We'll talk more about what those do in a later class. But they're also going to be removing organic solids out of the water. So this summer we had a huge sewage treatment plant mishap, and millions of gallons of sewage were poured into the water. Well, guess where all that went? It didn't just wash away. A lot of it got washed into salt marshes. And what happens is that water gets washed up into an area like this, and it gets absorbed and becomes fertilizer, and then the grass grows using it. So salt marshes are a really good thing to have, and I'm really happy to be able to do class from a nice salt marsh like this for you today. Now in the water right behind Mr. Amenta is a terrapin turtle. Oh, it just went underwater. But yeah, the terrapin is another example of an animal that needs to have the salt marsh in order to be able to survive. It's a turtle. It's similar to a sea turtle, but it can actually come up and crawl around on land, but actually lives in the salt water rivers of a salt marsh. And they just swim around eating fish and worms and whatever they can catch. And hopefully they'll come back up and be able to get a good look at it, but they're pretty skittish. All right, so they're gonna get back on the school bus here. Should have brought a bucket of water to clean my feet.
I was gonna say, you're gonna destroy my boat, huh?
Yeah, I'm gonna destroy the school bus. See if I can get back in without wiping out.
Alright,
You gonna go sit down first?
No, I just want to distribute the weight evenly so we don't sink the front of the boat. Everybody gets to watch Mr. Docker fall in the water.
Nope. No falling in for me. We're about to rip our cedar post out, but we'll take this out, and then we'll just head upstream and get a look at those egrets, if they'll let us get close enough.
See if you can leave your shoes up there.
I'll just stay up here for now. Drive slowly. All right, back on the school bus. So you guys still able to hear me and following along? Can't really tell what's going on here. Is it back on my face?
I can hear you. I'm assuming they can all hear you.
Okay. All right, I'm back to flip screen. So now I'm looking out over the bow of the boat, and we got this little flock of egrets. And hopefully we'll be able to spot a couple of more shorebirds that we can identify. But those are the egrets out there. They're staying just in far enough for maybe all you just see is white dots, but those are the birds for sure. And then we'll see if the school bus driver's as good as he says.
Oh, my phone. Put your phone down, Mr. Amenta.
Yeah, now you guys can yell at us for using our phones. Yeah, it's getting shallow pretty quick.
Yeah.
But you can see them flying off. They get pretty nervous for good reason. when those mean evil humans approach on their boats. But yeah, they're out there foraging for snails, mussels, crabs, isopods, which are the little tiny shrimp-like animals, and they're just eating as much as they can because they're about to fly south. That's why they're congregating in a big group. Usually they separate out and you only see one or two around, never a large group like this. So it's kind of neat to see that. Right in the foreground you can see the ice damage again, and then you can see the salt marsh hay, and then right up behind that all the glasswort turning colors for the fall for us. And now we're just kind of drifting in with the wind and the tide today. We've got, if we look up at the sky, I'd have to say that we're probably looking at 0% coverage for clouds today. We're under the
one little cloud over there.
Yeah, we're under the high pressure.
99.9.
Yeah, 99.9% clear today, and a little bit of fire smoke up there from California, but that's about it. And the wind is out of the southwest today, probably at about 10. Water temperature I think is still hovering about 70ish, and we've got
60 here.
60-degree water.
That's what I got. Yeah.
Wow. All right, so the water's really cooling off here in the rivers from our cold snap this weekend. And then we've got an incoming tide. So we're about halfway through the incoming tide. I think high tide's what?
4 something.
4:30ish today. So you can see just panning around the salt marsh here for you. All right, so that was the salt marsh, people, and I hope you enjoyed today's virtual field trip. We're gonna sign off. It's been at least 30 minutes, I would think.
And yeah, 28.
28, so I think we're good to go for today.
Ship's logs.
Ship's logs will be tomorrow when we get back in. So if you're virtual, you'll do it online. If you're in class, I'll be working with you, and you'll be working on your field trip tools some more. All right, have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Taco.
Bye. See you, Nicole.
Bye. Bye, Nicole.
Well, it seems like it worked.
I think so.
Oh, it's nice and shallow here. I can see the bottom.
I got 3.5 feet.
I got
All the recording look good?